Starts. A very good morning to all of you. We have been talking about an essay by Michel Foucault, What is an Author? In our last lecture, we got introduced with Michel Foucault, and then we went on talking about his views on authorship. So we understood the primary concern of Foucault in this essay. Okay, he tries to figure out how a text points out to a figure who is outside and proceeds with it. Then we talked about the title, and in the first section, we came to know that he responds to some of our most basic assumptions about authorship, wherein he thinks that authorship is a kind of, Foucault reminds us that we regard the concept of authorship as solid and fundamental. Okay, but it hasn't existed always. That's what he feels. This concept came into being, he explains, at a particular moment in history, and it may pass out of being. It's just like life and death came into being is got its life, and it may pass out of being means it may die, it may vanish. So that's what he says. So it is our tendency to view the concept of authorship as solid, and further authors as individuals, heroic figures. That's what we understood. So he's taking the challenge directly, not directly, he does not mention their names, his contemporaries such as Roland Barthes and Derrida. He's trying to oppose their thinking. Rather, he refers to death of the author by Roland Barthes indirectly. He does not take their name directly. Even he turns to Derrida without mentioning his name. So he tried to suggest that Derrida never really gets rid of the author, although he thinks that there is no center. Even Barthes, too, he declares the death of the author. He thinks that the author's powers and privileges to writing and language itself become the center of discussion in both the authors. Okay, he enjoyed this fight actually. He enjoyed this fight with Derrida and with Roland Barthes. Now, why does he take this particular jostling, kind of fighting? So, because he enjoys a fight, and partly because he doesn't want his readers to assume that authorship is a dead issue, a problem that has already been solved by Barthes and Derrida. He does not want his readers to think like that. Okay, so we talked about this, and in the second section, we came to know something about the author function. He talks about the author function in society. He raises questions about the functions of proper names, and he talks about the classificatory function while talking about author's function. Then he gives an example. We saw that if you go to a bookstore, you try to find a book on fiction, by the name of the author, not by about the subject matter, not by the year of publication, or not by the pages. Okay, so that is our what we call mentality. We are made to think like that. So he thinks if we don't classify books according to the names of authors, what will happen exactly then? He raises this question. What would happen to Oliver Twist, the famous book by Charles Dickens, if scholars were to discover that it hadn't been written by Charles Dickens. That is his concern here. Means wouldn't the bookstores feel that, or even most of us feel that novel would have to be reclassified in the light of that discovery when the author is unknown? Why should we always think about the book by the name of its author? Means the words wouldn't have changed. That's what I think. And he closed this section by introducing the concept of the author function. So author function is not a person, is not to be confused with the author or the writer. It is more like a set of beliefs. Okay, author function refers to a set of beliefs or assumptions which govern the production, circulation, classification, and consumption of text, which we understood this in the last lecture. Now we shall move ahead with section 3. Now he talks about this particular author function in terms of the set of beliefs or assumptions governing the production, circulation, classification, and consumption of text. Now he talks about 4 functions: production of text, circulation of text, classification of text, and consumption is reading of the text. So this is how the process takes place. Now, although it seems trivial, this is how the things happen. This problem may seem trivial because most of the literary texts that we study have already been attributed to an author. We simply ask about the author, nothing else. But imagine a case in which a scholar discovered a long forgotten poem, a poem which is forgotten, and whose author was completely unknown. You must be knowing such a book in English literature. Do you know English classic whose author's name is not known, which was written during the 8th century? Are you familiar with that? Have you come across in your reading of history of literature? There is a book.
Yes, sir.
Which is that? It is Beowulf. Beowelf. So suppose you come across such a book which has no author at all, which has long been forgotten, and at the same time the author was completely unknown. Okay, such a situation, will the book be irrelevant and will it lose its meaning? Now we know about Beowulf. Beowulf is a classical text. It is the first British English epic, we can say. And its writer, its author is some unknown person, anonymous person. Further, imagine that the scholar had a hunch that the author of the poem was William Shakespeare. Suppose you study some poem whose author was completely unknown, but the scholar who's reading that poem thinks that the author of the poem was William Shakespeare. Now, what would the scholar have to do? What rules would she or he have to observe? What standards would she have to meet? She or he, in order to convince everyone else that she was right or he was right. As you discover some book, the book has long been forgotten, the author was completely unknown. The scholar who studies that book comes to the conclusion that it is the book by William Shakespeare. Now, what should he or she do to convince others that his opinion is right? And then he refers to a situation in which this imaginary situation became a reality few years ago. Foucault mentioned that. Yes, this imaginary situation became a reality a few years ago when a scholar named Gary Taylor, the name of the scholar, suddenly announced that he had discovered a long, long Shakespeare poem, rediscovered rather. Okay, and who was the scholar who declared this? It was Gary Taylor. So many people viewed Taylor's announcement with skepticism. They didn't believe what Taylor announced. They viewed this announcement with skepticism. Skepticism is a kind of disbelief, and they argued against Taylor's view. And in their effort to argue against Taylor, the other scholars who were skeptics, who were not ready to believe in Taylor, they took help of, they resort. Okay, they resorted without realizing it. Of course, they didn't do it deliberately, unknowingly. They took help. They resort to the criteria of authenticity. And this criteria, you must be knowing, criteria is the plural form of criterion. Criterion is the singular term, and criteria is the plural form of criteria. So criteria of authenticity means if you talk about one, two, or many, two or many, then we say criteria. And this criteria of authenticity was proposed by Saint Jerome, and it was listed by Foucault. Okay, of course, they took help of this without knowing what they were doing. These scholars who opposed Taylor argued, for example, that the poem wasn't good enough to have been authored by Shakespeare. Okay, what was their argument? That the poem wasn't that good to say that it was written by William Shakespeare. What was the assumption behind this particular statement? They took for granted the assumption that Shakespeare was somehow incapable of sinking below a certain level of literary excellence. Means Shakespeare can't go below that level. He is of high level. Means he is an example of a literary excellence. And there is a certain level of his writing, and Shakespeare cannot be imagined going below that level. That was their assumption. If the poem wasn't good enough to appeal the readers or appeal them, therefore they said no. The poet or the writer, the author of this poem cannot be Shakespeare because Shakespeare has certain literary excellence and is incapable of coming down, sinking below that level. So this argument may help to keep this sort of situation in mind. Yes, you try to make sense of these third characteristics of the author function. He says, yes, the author is expected to be a literary excellent. So the term author doesn't refer purely and simply to a real individual, as he said in the first section. There is no solid and fundamental aspect in authorship. Authorship is not solid and fundamental. At the same time, author is not an individual, as we regard. So the term author doesn't refer purely and simply to a real individual. That's what he assumes. Okay, Foucault thinks like that. So the author for him is much like the narrator, he suggests, in that he or she can be an alter ego. You must be knowing the term alter ego for the actual flesh and blood writer. So, in many of the stories, we come across the alter ego of the writer. Means we think that it is the writer itself. It is a kind of autobiography. The protagonist stands for the writer itself. But what Foucault suggests is that the author is just like the narrator, the first person, third person narrator in the story. Okay, and he or she can be an alter ego. Suppose William Shakespeare is the writer, actual flesh and blood writer, and one who writes Hamlet. Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, we say. He must be an alter ego, the narrator of that particular story. Okay. So what we understand here is that his main goal, Foucault's main goal for this section, seems to describe four main characteristics of the author function. He tries to describe the characteristics of the author function. Now we shall go ahead with section 4. Okay, before that, we shall have some more discussion on section 3.